In February 2022, Robert Hayes was found guilty of 3 murders and was unmasked as the Daytona Beach serial killer, a killer who potentially claimed up to 7 lives. We're going to be hearing about each of the murder scenes for which he's been found guilty, and then find out how he was eventually caught. Of course, this video contains some graphic details some may find disturbing, so discretion is advised. And before we start, if you're interested in stories from the dark side of life, please remember to like and subscribe so you can be the first to hear about all the future videos posted by this channel. Okay, let's do it. It's Christmas Eve 2005 and a friend asks labour hall worker Laquetta Gunther to come over to help with the next day's dinner preparations. However, Laquetta rebuffs this invitation, instead preferring to visit a local bar. That evening she was murdered, and on December 26, 2005, her naked body was found laying face down in an alleyway. Laquetta had been shot in the back of the head, and as is the case with all the future victims, was a sex worker. From the crime scene, police managed to recover DNA evidence, and this will later be used to help convict Hayes. Less than 1 month after Laquetta's murder, the second victim would be found. Julie Green was a 34-year-old mother of 4 and a friend of Laquetta's. One evening, Julie leaves home to use a nearby payphone, and she's never seen again. Her body was found on January 14th, 2006, discarded in a ditch near a building site. Like Laquetta, Julie was found naked and had been shot in the back of the head. However, there was no DNA recovered from the scene. Just over a month later, the third body was found. On February 24th, 2006, 35-year-old Ioana Patton is discovered deceased, naked on a dirt road. Again, she had been shot, but unlike the previous 2 victims, these shots were to her body and not to her head. This time, not only were the police able to retrieve DNA from the scene, but they were also able to recover a shell casing too. Analysis of this casing revealed that it had been fired from a .40 caliber handgun, and this evidence will also be used towards securing the murder conviction for Hayes. At the end of the decade, things go cold, but in 2016 there is another murder. And it's the evidence from this murder that is used to locate Hayes. Rachel Bay was a 32-year-old sex worker who lived in an area on West Palm Beach. At around 2 AM on March 7th, she is last seen by a friend walking towards the intersection from where she worked. She is speaking on her cell phone, and nothing seemed out of place. But only 6 hours later, her naked body would be found by a highway road worker, several miles from where she was last seen. And unlike the previous 2 victims, Rachel's cause of death was strangulation and not the result of being shot. There were also injuries to her body that suggested that she'd put up a fight. She had multiple broken teeth, and there were numerous abrasions to her arms and hands. Due to lack of blood at the scene, police believe that she had been murdered elsewhere before being dumped on the highway. Her cell phone wasn't found at the scene, but this will be later used as evidence at Hayes' trial. Just as importantly, an examination of Rachel's body uncovered some DNA, and this DNA would eventually be used to trace Robert Hayes. But how did law enforcement manage to use the DNA recovered from the scene of Rachel's murder and link it to Hayes? The DNA that was recovered from the scene of Rachel's murder was sent for analysis, and it was found to match that at the scene of Laquetta and Ioana's murders, so detectives knew there was a link. Hayes had still not been identified at this time. However, Hayes would later become a suspect. He'd lived in the areas where the crimes were committed, and due to him owning the same type of gun that was used in the shootings, he'd already been questioned twice before. but for some reason, he'd been released. But now the police are going to investigate Hayes with a bit more scrutiny, and to do so they needed to get a profile of his DNA. In 2009, police would obtain that DNA. On September 13th, Hayes was waiting for a bus, and during that time he smokes a cigarette. When he's finished, he disposes of this cigarette and then boards the bus. Detectives quickly collect this discarded cigarette and send it off for forensic analysis. The following day, the results come back. And when comparing Hayes' DNA to that found at Rachel's crime scene, there's a staggering finding. The match is so strong that there's only a 700 billion to 1 chance that any other individual would have a stronger link. Basically, it's impossible for anyone else to be responsible for Rachel's murder. And Robert is arrested the next day. Although the DNA evidence is strong at this point, firearms investigations and ballistics tests will connect Hayes to the murders of Julie and Awana. During their investigation, detectives attempt to locate the firearm that was used during the 3 murders. Hayes did admit purchasing a gun in early 2005, the month in which the first victim, Laquetta, was killed. However, he told investigators that in March the following year, he had given the gun to his mother, but she refuted this claim. During his trial, his mother told the court that she had never been given a firearm by Robert. The story was a lie. More holes also began to appear in his recount of what happened to the gun. In December of 2006, Hayes had filed a report of the gun being stolen from his vehicle. So he's told investigators 2 different stories about the gun, so nothing made sense. And then there's Rachel's missing cell phone. An investigation showed that the phone remained active in the days after she was murdered, and the majority of its usage came from a cell tower that served the residence in which Hayes lived. This was yet more evidence that Hayes had come into contact with Rachel before she died. Even to this day though, the gun and the cell phone have still not been recovered. All of the evidence detectives gathered was used in Hayes' trial, which began on February the 11th, 2022. Hayes will actually undergo 2 trials as the murders happened in 2 different jurisdictions. The first trial was for the murders of Laquetta, Julie and Awana, and that's the trial we'll cover in this video. His trial for Rachel's murder will begin shortly. So when this trial began, 12 jurors were asked to consider the following questions. 1. Did Hayes possess a firearm during the commission of the offence? 2. Did he personally display or carry the firearm? 3. Did he discharge the firearm? And 4. Did the discharge cause great bodily harm or death to each woman? They unanimously said yes to each of those questions in each case. Hayes was found guilty of first-degree premeditated murder, and prosecutors are seeking the death penalty. What do you think should happen to him? Life imprisonment or death? Let us know in the comments. Police believe that had he not been apprehended, then Hayes was very likely to have continued killing. In fact, there are other murders he's suspected of having committed, and detectives are trying to gather evidence to link him to them. So that's the story of how police managed to capture Robert Hayes, the Daytona Beach serial killer. Do you have any thoughts on the case? Or do you know anything that's not mentioned in this video? Let us know in the comments below. And if you liked this video, then please remember to like and subscribe to be informed of any future videos posted by this channel. Until then.